Hi, it's Brandon from Arabian Armory. Today we're going to be talking about the Witcher series. Now, I'm a big fan of the game, not as much as Dark Souls, but still, it's an okay game. And this is a show that's an adaptation off of that. Now, it's not based in historical concepts, but it does follow a certain of realism that it's grounded in. It's not the kind of fantasy that World of Warcraft is. Um, that being said, there are some issues I have with some of the armor and some of the choreography, and we're going to get into that. So first off, and by the way, there's going to be some spoilers here, but this video is about me commenting on what I've seen, so spoilers are kind of apparent. Anyways, one of the first factions what we see in the series, this couple, they're married and they come from different families, and on the wife's side, she's wearing late 15th century Gothic armor, and on the husband's side, he is wearing Greenwich armor, and the armor of the knights for this faction seems to be a mix of Greenwich and Gothic. So it's not out of place to see these armors exist together. Historically, late 15th century Gothic, going into even the 16th century, the leader of Germany, which was called the Holy Roman Empire at the time, was Emperor Maximilian. Now, Maximilian was actually very close friends with King Henry from England. King Henry looked up to Maximilian. He saw him not only as a political leader, but this almost angelic figure because he fought, he competed in tournaments, and he fought on the battlefield. And he had this charm to him, and so given that those real life leaders for those two respective cultures were friends with each other and they're close in time period because they knew each other, it makes sense to see these armors coexist in this faction. So I'm like, okay, I'm fine with the armor being two different styles because it's two different families merging into one. That's cool. But there are some issues, and I would say the armor is more inspired by than properly based on. So when you see Gothic armor, and I have this example right here, the ridges, what they're doing is they prevent the armor from crumbling perpendicular to them. So that obviously resists a lot of the impact from an axe or a sword. What you also notice is that they start very broad by the shoulders and then taper significantly, sometimes even more than this. This is about as much tapering as I can get away with because I need to lose a little bit of my holiday weight. But anyways, the taper is supposed to have the armor fit to you correctly. The part that you want that upper section of that plate to end is right about where the last of your ribs ends. You don't want it to go all the way down to your hip bone. And yet what you see in the armor in the show is some of the breastplates, they end where they're supposed to, and then some of them go all the way down to the hip bone. You don't want that because that's going to dig into the bone every time you lean forward or you lean sideways. It can be uncomfortable or even painful. But the ones that do end where they're supposed to, there's another issue. So what you see in here is a skirt of plates that is articulated. And so this skirt of plates is what provides protection for beyond where your ribs end and then over the hips, right? And then a little bit past the hips to part of the upper thigh. For some reason, the skirt of plates is omitted on essentially every armor that you see in this show. My problem with that is, for some reason, they put tassets just directly at the end of the breastplate. And again, some of them end appropriately, some of them go way too far down. Now, because they're omitting an entire section of armor, what you see a lot of knights is that they get killed because they get stabbed there. And this is a recurring theme that you see throughout the show. There's supposed to be fans that attach to the elbow cops and knee cops. Paulines is a more correct term. But anyways, these fans that are blocking swords from coming the inside of the elbow or from behind the knee are technically for the knee one that can even protect the upper calf. These are missing. And when you have those omitted from the armor, that makes more gaps that the enemy can exploit. And again, you see these knights getting killed by getting stabbed there. On the one hand, I'm glad that they're not treating swords as lightsabers. On the other hand, why would you have gaps like this? It's silly. It doesn't make sense historically. It wasn't done historically. They covered that on purpose so that you wouldn't die. But I guess they needed some kind of excuse to have people die because their armor is just designed silly. Other issues with the armor, what you see a lot is the breastplates. While they're not necessarily flat, some of them are either not domed enough or they're over domed. So the ones that aren't domed enough, they kind of fit like LARP armor, and it does suit the body a little bit, but you want to have enough curve to it that, assuming you're not also using the fluting like Gothic does, but you want to have enough curve and dimension to it that blades will deflect outward and away from you. And they even do that with Gothic stuff, even with the fluting. Obviously, it's very hard to achieve, but it's done. Um, but on the opposite end of the spectrum, they have globose-style breastplates, almost like 14th century, which is inappropriate for 15th and 16th century designs. The problem with that is when you look at the 16th century design in particular, the historical design is a peascod or peacod. I forget if there's an S or not, but the idea is that you have sort of wasp waist to it, right? And so when you have that very aggressive taper in the front, that's very domed and curved in that way, but it's not globose, like a Cherbourg armor is globose. It's deflecting, which is very good, but it's actually more efficient at deflecting than the globose shape is. And what's more than that for 16th century armor, and on top of the full breastplate, you also had a secondary layer of a placard that was applied over that. This could be removed in battle after it's significantly damaged. So if you're a cavalry rider, like or if you're an officer, anyone who's on a horseback, this armor historically could actually stop musket fire. This was armor that was recreated in the modern day, and I have linked to it in my Facebook page before, but recreating the armor using raw ore and going from the ground up from there, it stopped musket fire. That's how effective it was. That's how thick it was. And like I said, that outer layer of placard that was actually removable so that you can toss it aside. And omitting that kind of stuff on the king and queen, king particularly because he's wearing that star armor, the queen's wearing Gothic, but omitting that on the king and his officers seems silly. Why would you not include that? Again, it's just they needed an excuse for why these knights are dying, because the armor sucks. Okay. Other issues with the armor. So, spoilers, again, I warned you ahead of time. The king dies in this. The king that you see in the first few episodes. And he gets shot in the face with an arrow. He's not wearing a helmet, which is just outlandish. Why would you be on the battlefield and not wear a helmet? Now, some of you are going to think to yourselves, if you haven't seen the series, oh, well, you know, Hollywood likes to have an omission of helmets so that you can see the actors' faces and you can hear their voices, and so you're getting what you pay for when you have this budget for the show. But not in this case. So the armor, the helmets in particular that they use in this kingdom are called burgonets. They're a 16th century design. And the burgonets that they're using have nothing covering the face. So you can still see their expressions, you can still hear them clearly. There's no reason why they should omit the helmet for the king. The queen, funny enough, is wearing a helmet. And she takes it off after watching him get shot in the head with an arrow. And she collapses and holds him and is like, oh my god, why? And I understand, again, just taking the helmet off is for dramatic effect, but it's completely open-faced. There's no reason to take it off. You just saw someone get headshot with an arrow because they're the king and you're the queen. Why would you not keep your helmet on? It's just silly nonsense. As for people that aren't the king, the queen, the knights, there are brigands and like mercenary groups, I guess you could say, that are in service to this one girl that has magic witch powers because she's part of some prophecy about a solar eclipse that happened. Okay. They're wearing goofy nonsense. I think one of them might be wearing something similar to a proper brigandine, but the rest of them are wearing like goofy biker gear, or not even biker gear, I don't even know what to call it. It's just leather nonsense. It's leather nonsense that's not really based on historical clothing, and it's not really based on armor either, and it's not going to stop a sword or an axe or a hammer. It's just silly. Why? So yeah, the knights are close-ish, but some serious problems, and then everyone else is just, no, bad armor. Bad armor. Moving on to the weapons are overall actually pretty good. I don't see any swords that look like fat paddles that look like, you know, the Buster Sword. That's good. I also don't see any swords that are too thick in the guard or have an outlandishly big pommel. They're all proportioned appropriately. If I have this sword as an example, this is mine. The guards are about as thick as this, maybe sometimes thinner. And the length of the long swords are sometimes this size or sometimes a little bit longer, so perfectly fine. But that's going to bring me to my next point, the choreography for Geralt. So, and I hate that I even have to do this, but So he grips his sword like this in one of the fight scenes. It's one that people were talking mad crap about. And I'm going to quote someone's Facebook comment on the justification for it. They said, and this is completely wrong, but they said that it's okay to grip his sword like this because it's a hand and a half sword / bastard sword, and that there's a handle in front of the guard. Now, I'm going to tell you all right now, first, hand and a half sword, that's a modern term, that's not a historical term, but I'm okay with it because it keeps everyone on the same page of what we're talking about. But it doesn't mean that there's a handle in front of the guard. That's not what hand and a half means. What hand and a half sword, as a modern term refers to, is a subtype of longsword where if you try to grip it with two hands, you end up with a baseball grip. But what you can do is you can lower that second hand to the pommel to grant yourself about an extra half hand of space, and that will get you a lot more leverage, and that will give you a lot more power and control and finesse with the blade. So that's what that word means. When he grips that section of his blade, specifically it's called a ricasso on his. Ricasso, and I don't have one on this one, is a intentionally flat, unsharpened section past the guard. And it's okay to have a sword that has a ricasso, it was done historically, because you're not going to cut people with this part of the blade. You have a guard, and the guard, as I've mentioned so many times before, is a weapon. Punch someone in the eye socket with a guard that's going to go into their brain and kill them. So that's fine. I can't justify him grabbing his sword by the ricasso, though. So he's fighting in a marketplace, and it's sort of cramped, but not very cramped. And whenever you're in an up-close, tight-quarters fight, it makes sense to use an ice pick grip, because the arc of your swing is going to be shorter, it holds tighter to your body, so you're less likely to smack into the walls. Obviously, it's better to just use a shorter weapon, but he didn't have a shorter weapon on him. He does take one from someone else, so that I did like a lot. The weapon he took from someone else in particular is just a straight-up Roman gladius. If I had to pinpoint, based on length, the Hispaniasis or something like that. So Spain was called Hispania or something close to that when it was a part of the Roman Empire, and that specific type of gladius is what I would say it's close to because of its length. That is the longest type of gladius. The shortest one on the other end of the spectrum is the Pompey gladius. But yeah, he uses a gladius maybe 20-something inches long, and yeah, that's a good choice to transition away from using his longsword. But even so, the difference between him having held it in his ricasso versus him having held it in the blade is only a couple inches. And based on where his position was relative to the people he's fighting and the walls around him, it still didn't make sense to me that he gripped it like this. It's just theatrical nonsense. And I'm going to ask, don't try to justify the silly nonsense. Some people said, well, maybe he was going to half-sword then change his mind. No. So half-swording is when you have one hand on the grip, keep your other hand on the blade, and you try to pinpoint aim the tip so that you thrust into the gap of an armor. He didn't do that. He did this. Other people said maybe he was going to do a mordhau. A mordhau is when you have both hands on the blade, not just one. You grip it down here, and you use the pommel and the guard kind of like a hammer or mace, and you smash things. He didn't do that either. So, again, it's just, I don't know why he would think that this was a good idea. But he does it, and since he's a witcher, it works out fine. Something about his choreography, obviously he's doing a lot of overswinging and telegraphs. Those are bad. What's really bothering me is spinning. I've studied Eastern martial arts. I grew up doing it for a while. And so, obviously, there are some techniques like spinning back kicks or spinning back fists. It's like, oh, well, you're generating more power because you're spinning, so that's a good thing. But see, the justification that you could give for other things is what eliminates the justification for this. He's a witcher. He has strength and speed greater than a human of his size. Maybe double the strength, 50% extra strength. Not much more than double the strength of someone his size is what I seem to see from him. So, if he's already stronger and faster than a normal human of his size and his muscularity, if you want to use that term, generating extra power from spinning is pointless. It doesn't. Why? Him not spinning is already more than enough power to essentially cleave someone in half because of his extra inhuman strength. So then I look at, well, there is something that happens because he's spinning that made me happy. So he's fighting a woman, and he's doing his spinning nonsense, and she realizes he's not looking at me because he's spinning. He's not turning his head around. So she pulls a knife out of her pocket and stabs him right in the leg. And that is something that made me very happy, because that's exactly what would happen if you're doing goofy Hollywood spinning over and over and over. You're not looking at your opponent. They're going to pull a knife on you. They're going to stab you as a punishment. Of Of course, she herself is spinning a lot, so that is an issue, but it's not the end of the world. Choreography overall, I'd give it something like a 6.5 out of 10. It's not grounded enough in reality for me to deeply appreciate it, but they're not doing Star Wars flipping and spinning through the air stuff, so there's that. Um, I wish I could see some Mordhaus and half sorting techniques because that'd be great. But as for the armor, the show, the overall, it seems across the board a 6.5 out of 10. Some people might appreciate the plot a bit more. I don't know. I've only seen the first 5 episodes. I'm gonna see the rest of the season and judge it from there. Um, but yeah, if you're already a fan of the game, I'd give it a solid recommendation to watch the show. If you liked Game of Thrones, I would also give you a recommendation to watch the show. Um, yeah, those are just my thoughts, and have a good day.